Obi anywhere simwa. Pesoko. Obi anywhere. Pesoko. Why no one where was so good and one of a castle pe? Media me count. Me pesoko pa. Soko, 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 nema pe. Soko, 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 nema pe. Nema pe soko, soko, nema pe. Bema pe soko, soko, nema. Soko, 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 soko. Legon abrabo. Vicissitudes of life in Legon. Life in Legon. Legon abaraboy, economics in kwa. Legon abaraboya, economics in kwa. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are the Legon Palm Wine Band, serenading you with palm wine music. Unfortunately, there is no palm wine here. It's cocktail. Legon abaraboy, economics in kwa. Legon abaraboya, economics in kwa. Yeah, we'll make it. Mami be pie asene. Suku monse munti. And I'm a bank crying. University of Ghana. Obibesie, University of Legon. Legon ya me ba ye ya. Eto de bia. Ekom. Au. Ekom. Eto de bia. Ekom. Au. Ekom. Misika besan. Afei na to many plans. Papa Sunu ne kan asem. Emmanuel took plans. Economics in kwa na bebo. Wanya ni sa enye yo. Eti economics in kwa na bebo. Ao Legon abaraboy, economics in kwa. Legon abaraboya, economics in kwa. Suku monsemui, economics. Once again, you are welcome. Legon Abrabo. Sewa. Yeah. Menso. Abrabo di me pie cry. Obi abranti amasiso. Pese me bobra. Mi tubata free di kro. Se me ba kro kesi em. En kan kro di em. Na me bobra. Na me bedru ha no. Se na fo. Hey. Asana mo yano wa ha. Watch it back 2 million. Full plate back on 5 million. Hey, now say na mo ye wa ha. Ekra ha. Ani ebe so ki gare ni sa. Ebe fa fom sa. Ebe peche sa. Ebe fro tro sa. Passa Obenu ye benisa Obenu siosa Edi economic sisa Legona Braboya, economy sinqua. Oh, Legona Brabono, economy sinqua. Oh, Betty Bushke, economy sinqua. Oh, Legona Braboya, economy sinqua. Legendary, legendary, and you would Sanary, legendary, Sanary, every legendary, Sanary, legendary, Sanary, legendary, Sanary, legendary.
Ago. Good evening and welcome, Akwaba, to the NYU Accra Gardens. We are honored to have you grace us with your presence, both physically and online, for this edition of NYU Accra Laboni Dialogue, dubbed Universal Stories, a storytelling dialogue with Ekua Brew-Hammond. Now, before I proceed to introduce our person of the moment, I'd like to mention that there are more than enough washrooms around, so if you need to use the washroom, there's one to your immediate right, and then there are two in the building behind you. Moving on to our lady of the moment, Ekua Brew-Hammond. Ekua Brew-Hammond is the author of the children's picture book, Blue, a history of the color as deep as the sea and as wide as the sky. Illustrated by Caldecott honor artist Daniel Minter. Named among the best books of 2022 by NPR, New York Public Library, Chicago Public Library, Kirkus Reviews, Bank Street College of Education, and the Center for the Study of Multicultural Literature. Blue was honored with the 2023 NCTE Orbis Pictures Award, recognizing excellence in the writing of nonfiction for children. It was named to the 2023-2024 Texas Blue Bonnet Award Master List, and it was nominated for NAACP Image Award. Most recently, it was announced as part of the 2023 Capitol Choices list of noteworthy books for children and teens. Brew-Hammond also wrote the young adult novel Powder Necklace, which Publishers Weekly called a winning debut, and for adult readers, she edited Relations, an anthology of African and diaspora voices, of which Kirkus Review said in a starred review, "This smart, generous collection is a true gift." In 2023, she partnered with the curators of Brooklyn Museum's Africa Fashion Exhibit to pen and perform an original poem in the museum's companion film. Her newest novel for adults, My Parents' Marriage, released in the US July 9, 2024. Booklist called it a vivid read that finely captures the formative shifts and bittersweet revelations of womanhood, while the author, Melissa Rivero, called it a propulsive read that will take a hold of you with its honesty, determination, and heart. Every month, Brew-Hammond co-leads a writing fellowship whose mission is to write light into darkness. Learn more at nanabrewhammond.com. At this point, I'd hand over to our ever-vivacious moderator, Kina Likamani. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Laboni Dialogues, hosted by NYU, and its very dynamic director, Frankie Edozian. This is the last event of the year, and so when we conclude, we hope Frankie will have us back next year sometime. So welcome, and thanks for being here. Nanekua, welcome.
Hello, Kina. It's so good to be here.
You and we've known each other a long while. This is our first conversation together. I'm actually amazed we haven't had a public chat before. So we're going to have fun. I'm a very easy moderator, you know. So after this, somebody is supposed to prompt me. Who is supposed to prompt me about questions when it's time? Sharon, hi. Yeah, otherwise I'll go on. So Nanekua, by the time you publish My Parents' Marriage, you already started out writing short stories. You wrote and published Powder Necklace, and you did Blue, and you edited the anthology Relations. You know, when I'm doing these events, I kind of want to also read up what people have been saying about the book, the person's most recent book. And a lot of them, they were like, there are two sentiments in the beginning paragraph. One of them is, you are making a comeback. As though you are an athlete who had retired. I'm not going to write anymore, now you're back. The other one is, of course, it's subtle, but this idea that a writer isn't a writer until they've published an adult novel.
Yeah.
Right? So do you think you've made it now?
I mean, I feel like getting published is its own Herculean effort. So whatever you can publish, I feel like
Yes.
I've been a writer since the day, I should actually say I've been a writer since the day I decided that I was going to be a writer.
When was that?
I think it was at Infantsiman Girls. I went to Infantsiman Girls in Salt Pond, and I remember as I came from the States, it was very traumatic for me. I missed my family. I was, getting bullied and all of these different things. And as I was in the midst of that experience, I said, wow, this would make a really good book. And so I think at that moment, I knew that writing was what I wanted to pursue. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know what it meant to be a writer, but I think that is when I really knew. So I do believe that if you are a person who wants to write and has sort of made up your mind that you're going to try to make it work, you're a writer. But then there's the other side of it, of getting published. And I think that it's many of us writers don't speak about what it takes to get published, but one day I will write about that. And when I do, I don't even know how I'm gonna, how honest I can be, but I will do it when I can be as honest as possible, because that sort of baptism by fire that you go through every time you try to get a book out into the world, I think that also forms you as a writer, and it's a very important process.
Thank you for that. Your mom is here, so I won't put her on the spot. But I knew you'd gone to Vasa.
Yeah.
And I knew you had gone to Infantiman. What I didn't know, I just found out yesterday, was that you were born in the States.
Yes.
Then you went to school, and then they were like, you are going to Ghana.
Yes.
And you are going to go to school.
Yes.
You are going to go to boarding school.
Yes.
Why did your parents do that?
Why did you do that,
No,
Mommy?
don't ask her.
You
make sense.
You know what? My dad, in particular, always spoke of his time in boarding school in Ghana as an amazing time in his life. He loved it, and he really felt that it was just great formatively for young people to go through that experience. So that was a big part of our lives growing up, just hearing him reminisce. He went to Infantiman. He reminisced about the school all the time. So that was a big part of our growing up. But I think that, so I'm 47 years old. So when I was around 10, 11, there was the crack epidemic in New York. And that was, it hit every community. Though our community wasn't ravaged in the same way, it would be like, we're sweeping up the grounds and you'd see crack vials, things like that. And so, and it's so crazy, because I was actually thinking I would love to write about this now that I can really understand it. But there was a year when all of the boys in our neighborhood just disappeared, either to jail or prison or died. So it was a really weird time, and I think that for my parents, they didn't want us to be sort of, part of that. And then also too, we were just kids, we had our little misbehavings, nothing crazy, but I think that they just felt that it would be good for us to kind of get out of that environment.
So if they hadn't sent you, and you said it was a bit traumatic, obviously, because I'm guessing the very different environment, do you think you would have, and therefore wanting to make sense of your experience through writing, would you have wanted to be a writer? You think you'd have wanted to be a writer anyway?
I do think I would, because I was kind of always writing, looking back. I wrote in my diary, and I would put it in the bookcase, things like that. But I think that Ghana really shifted my whole life, coming to Ghana at that age, because prior to me going to Ghana, I had one way of thinking about myself. I thought about myself outside of myself. I'm dark-skinned. My name is Nana. Don't mention the middle name, because Ekua, what is that? I'm Nana Brew-Hammond, and anything that sort of made me other was a threat to my existence. And being sort of taken out of that environment and coming to Ghana, and now being, hey, Fantini on to Fanti. Like, you're a Fanti girl, you can't speak Fanti. It's like, oh my gosh. Like, and no one had any problem with my name. And they would say, what is Nana? It's, you know, like just things like that. And so it forced me to see myself differently. And also, for the first time, I had a context. Because in the United States, growing up, I was black, but I wasn't African American. So I didn't have the same cultural experience as many of the people that I, you know, grew up with or knew. And so coming to Ghana and being in a situation where there were other people who were dark, you know what I mean? Not that there aren't dark people in the United States, but that it wasn't a negative. There are people who understood my name. They called me Nane Ekua, you know. Just being connected with that was so huge. And I was 12. So it just shifted everything for me. Because then I remember when I first came to Ghana, like I just felt very much like, oh my gosh, like I was so recoiling of the environment, and I didn't understand that it was by design, that I was in a way looking down on my own self and where I came from. And so being in Ghana helped me to have that perspective that I needed, so that when I left, then I became the insufferable person who has traveled, because then I was like, what do you mean you haven't traveled? You haven't sat on a plane, you don't know what Africa is like, I can tell you. Because I started to realize how limited and narrow the vision of people have of the world outside of, you know, the United States. So that was big.
Good. I'm often, this is a, I'm just gonna ask.
Okay.
Yeah, because it bothers me a bit. Why? So I feel like anybody African can write about the continent. So this is not about the stories you choose to write. But I feel like, and part of me understands, but I feel like we are missing a lot of stories from our people in the diaspora about their experiences there.
Yeah.
And so, because let me say this publicly, I bristled when Jesse wrote, what is it called? Homegoing? So I want you to talk a little bit about the hold because the hold is so strong that it's almost as though our people in the diaspora discount their whole lives when it comes to writing. I mean, a lot more people are writing novels about Africans in the diaspora in their lives now. But it's almost as though it's discounted, as though it's not something to write about. It's not rich. It's not a valid experience.
That's a great question. I think that it's very tricky, or it has been, because a lot of what we see now, like when I think about the fact that my first book, Powder Necklace, came out in 2010, and what has transpired between 2010 and 2024 is just remarkable. In 2010, there wasn't any of this. There wasn't Peja, there wasn't Ake, there wasn't all of the other festivals that are happening all across the continent. There weren't bookstagrammers and bloggers, and none of that infrastructure existed. And, you know, we can talk about sort of the publishing industry a little bit later, but one of the reasons why I said the business of publishing, what it does to you, how to even get a book published, I'm like, whether the book is good or bad, like, congrats. Because it's tricky as a Black person, because if we're thinking of it as a business, the market is expecting a certain type of story from a Black person in that context. And so it's only really now that there is an interest. And a lot of it, credit to Chimamanda Adichie, because when her books came out, then people were like, oh, when Americana came out, people are like, oh, okay, yeah, there is another type of Black story in this context. But it's very difficult to get, it still is, but it's very difficult to get a book published about what it is to grow up African or grow up Ghanaian or grow up whatever it is in America. And I'm just saying Africa, but there's Panamanians, there's Jamaicans, there's so many different things. I grew up in such a melting pot of, Black immigrants, and you don't really see those stories, and that is the next step,
I remember when, I think it's Jhumpa Lahiri.
Yeah.
When she wrote The Namesake.
Yeah.
It's a collection of short stories about being Indian in America. It was hugely successful. So I thought, well, the tide is going to turn. They're going to want to see more stories about immigrant families. So, well, it's still something I pushed, and I'm always asking. And I won't lie, every time someone in the diaspora's first book is set in Africa, I'm like, oh, you know what I mean? But anyway, I have issues. Going back to Mfantsiman and your experience, did it match up to your dad's? Of course, you cover it in Powder Necklace, but did it?
It wasn't. The experience was not a good experience in the sense of I do not remember the time mostly. I don't remember most of it fondly. However, it was the most. It changed my life completely in many good ways. When I went to Mfantsiman, like I said, pre-Mfantsiman, I had a low vision or idea of myself. When I left, I had it was a finishing school for me in that way, of really understanding who I am, what my value is as an individual, as a young woman. It was a good experience, and I made some of my closest friends in that experience. We were all, all of us were the bronies, the three bronies that were there. We were like clinging to each other for life. And other people, I never thought that I would ever want to speak to other people from that school again, but now I'm on the WhatsApp groups, we're all, connected, and I love them. And so, yeah.
Good. We're going to leave. We're coming to my parents' marriage.
Okay.
So, marriage is always a big topic in literature.
Yeah.
And African women writers, not so much African men, they couldn't be bothered. But African women writers are always trying to make sense of marriage and its demands. Buchi Emecheta, of course, in The Joys of Motherhood, My Mother in Changes. Mariam Abba in So Long a Letter, and on and on and on and on. I think we are trying to make sense of polygamy and the patriarchy, and trying to make spaces where women can exist and be free. And every story in the genre is unique in its own way. It's like, how many ways can you look at this? A multitude of ways. So what was it about, your mom is here again. What was it about your own experience, either what was in your family or what you had seen women go through, that inspired you to write
this? So I want to say this book is not about my actual parents or their marriage. My mother makes sure that I let everybody know this every time I go anywhere, and it's the truth. It is fiction, it's a novel, but I was, what inspired me to write the book is, one, I was in the process of, I was dating someone that I knew that I wanted to marry, but I didn't realize that I had a lot of negative ideas about men in terms of fidelity and in terms of, relationship, marriage. And I wanted to really sort of investigate where these ideas were coming from, because it was such a strong feeling, like, and growing up, you hear, oh, men are bad. All these men, the men will do this. Men. And I'm like, okay, where is this idea coming from? And so as I started to just kind of mull over it, then I started hearing it everywhere. I would talk to girlfriends, and they would say, oh, what our mothers went through, I would never. And a lot of friends are single or were staying single because of this fear of things they had seen. And I thought back to just my parents' community, because when they came to the States, they were very young, and they had a lot of, we grew up with like all the aunties and the uncles and whatnot. And I just remembered now, I just looked back and I was like, wow, we were really seeing a lot of these marriages up close. Some were amazing, some were turbulent, all of these different things. But it just made me start to really interrogate why things were structured as they were. And then in the midst of all of that, someone sent me a WhatsApp, and it was sort of like a tongue-in-cheek WhatsApp by a lawyer, written by a Ghanaian lawyer. And she was talking about the 3 different types of marriage in Ghana. The customary marriage, the Mohammedan marriage, and the ordinance marriage. And, sort of talking about what each marriage was legally within Ghana. And then the punchline was, so maybe you need to ask yourself, are you even married? Because if basically the way the WhatsApp was worded is, a lot of times when the spouse dies, then the question becomes, who is the thing? And then of course we who are in Ghana, we are aware of someone dies, and now there's two Mrs. so-and-sos who are fighting over the property, and then their kids. And all of I've seen that too, where, for a generation, now the kids of one wife are not speaking to the kids of this other wife, and then everyone dies, and then the house is just sitting there in Osu or wherever it is, And so I just really wanted to delve into it. So I just started reading marriage case laws and reading as much as I could find on the topic. And it was just becoming richer and richer and richer. And it was helping me also to make sense of, again, things that I had seen, and I just wanted to write about it because I feel like it's not resolved. We kind of still have this, so it comes back to this idea of, oh, these men, they're just out here, they're not good, men. But it's because I think we haven't really fully resolved where we stand on what it means to be married.
So just because we'll be going back and forth on the issue. Apparently, there are 3 types of marriages in Ghana: ordinance or customary, which is not religious, but you can marry multiple wives. Then there is the Mohammedan, which is religious, and you can marry multiple wives. Then by the way, the customary can be Christian. And then there is what is it?
So then there's the ordinance, which is white wedding.
Uh-huh. And the ordinance, you can have 1 Mrs., right? But actually, there's only 1 marriage in Ghana, because you can have ordinance and have Mrs. so-and-so, and then the man can go into customary and have 4. You see what I'm saying? Uh-huh. So it's always a joke to me. I say we have 1 marriage in Ghana, and what determines it is the man. It's the man that actually determines, am I going to have a straight-up Ghanaian law, formal, or am I going to have a mixture, or am I going to... there's just the marriage is the man. The man determines it. Because the law doesn't actually give you, the woman, room to say, okay, you married me and we went and signed in the court, so you can't have traditional 4 wives. There's one marriage.
Yeah.
And you say something in the book, and I want to discuss that because it's also about power, right? And you drop it because we say this a lot. And it's like, oh, I'm going to say this in Fanti, then I'll translate. Benyin is always
Yeah.
When a man has money, he can do whatever it is he wants. Meaning, you can't object if he wants to take. If he can take care of 10 wives, he can have 10 wives. And we say this.
Yeah.
And we also say that about chieftaincy. Oh, you're in into our door. It's a very political thing we do here, where love, in fact, I think love on the continent is quite political in the way in which we do marriage, because we allow all this power, and there is never any critique of that statement. Like, so he has money, and so that can he not be must he acquire? Because it's about power, right? So when you Mauli.
Yeah.
So I will just introduce the characters because you're all going to buy the book. The polygamous patriarch in this book is called Mauli, and he has married a lot. He marries and divorces and marries, and he lies. He lies. In fact, he marries the women or gets them pregnant without telling that he has, like, or maybe I have actually 3 wives and 6 children somewhere in another house, right? What you've done very well is, and I want you to talk about the creation of the character of Mauli. The thing that unifies Ghanaian men who do polygamy, and I'm only going to talk about Ghanaian men, is that they really like drama. They are emotional. You know, they like to say women are the ones who are emotional. No, men who do polygamy are addicted to drama and emotions. And then they will sit back and say, the women give me a headache. Well, you did the arrangement. They thrive on it. Please talk about Mauli, because he's a trip, you see.
Mauli Nuga. Okay, so Mauli is a very charismatic figure. And I think what's so interesting about Mauli, for me, when I was creating him, is that he loves his mother. And he worships his mother in a way. And so I think that, not that he's looking for his mother in his wives, but I think that in some way he feels absolved of any responsibility to be respectful to the women that he's with. But I don't think he would think of it in that way. I think that he is a man who he is able to, one of his giftings is that he is able to connect with people on a very soul level, and that is attractive to many women. And so he's able to get women. And he's also able to do well because of this gifting in business. And so the two come together for him in a powerful way. And I think that because part of our culture too is that if you have money and you're able to take care of, you know, you also become a god in a way, because then, you know, now you're taking care of your extended family. Everybody is looking to you to rain down, you know, that money and that care. And so he's not really being challenged. Everything is great for him. And the thing about Mauli too is that the women that he's with, they don't need him for money. And that was important to me too. He is a man who likes a successful woman. He likes that kind of woman. And so that's part too of the betrayal, because he comes to you, he woos you, and you think, okay, yes, it's just the two of us. And then it becomes, you get the revelation that it's not. But I think that he is also a product of his culture. And I think that for him, he he did what he could to be the man that he is, and he feels that everybody should do what they need to do to be who they need to be. He's a romantic, but he's not romantic about that.
While causing quite a lot of devastation. So the Marley, at this point when we start the book, is living with his fifth wife. They don't have children, but his two daughters from, in fact, his former wife, who has absconded to Togo. It's really interesting. The two daughters, Kokui and Nami, right? And Kokui cannot see the forest for the trees. She's like blocked by being the daughter of this man in this situation. And just, in fact, passes the entire experience of her life through being the lens of being this daughter with this father who does these things all the time. In fact, in the opening scene, and I can tell you that I'm not giving anything away, she and her sister have gone to some celebration, come home late at night. They are worried that, it's like their father will be upset. But then at the gate, they meet this woman who is cursing out the dad and the sisters and has left a newborn baby. Turns out she is the wife of a customs officer. I mean, this man is, you're kind. He's promiscuous. So let's talk about, again, it's polygamy gives so many varied experiences. But what was it about the child of a polygamous arrangement and a father like that made you want to write from this point of view?
I wanted to write about it because I think that, again, I think everyone, whether your parents, however your parents are united, we move into, though that is our model, that's our first model, whether they were married, they were whatever, that is our first model of a relationship. And I think that whether we are aware of it or not, it impacts the decisions that we make in relationship. So as I mentioned, I have tons of friends who are like, oh my gosh, because of what my mother went through, I don't want to get married. Or you have the opposite where everything was amazing and I don't know if I can live up to that. So therefore, so I think that shadow is always going to hang over it, and then you have to decide, what you're going to make of it, right? So that was something that was interesting to me, just as sort of, anthropologically, like I'm interested in that. But I was also super interested in what it is to be the daughter of a man who you love. He's an amazing, charismatic man. He's your father. He's afforded you a certain lifestyle. He's a wealthy man. But at the same time, he has betrayed your mother and so many women in his orbit, because when this man, whom in some ways you are also lionizing, is treating the women that you love in that way, you come back to yourself and you ask yourself, what am I worth? And I wanted to play in that tension. And I think that for Kokui, she's blocked, as you said. She's spinning around this axis of like, who am I and what am I worth? And I think, a broader sort of, we're here in Ghana and like we hear all the stories like, these, not going to mention the university's name, but those girls are all, when the Benz parks, all the girls come, running out. And it's like, those are colloquialisms, but it's not funny. Like that is something we need to interrogate in our culture, this idea of, this kind of sugar daddy.
Praying.
Exactly. It's something we need to interrogate. Our young women shouldn't feel that our only value is, And it's not just in Ghana, it's everywhere, you know what I mean? But we as women shouldn't feel that our value is related to our sexuality. That shouldn't be. Are
you a feminist?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I believe that every single human being has worth, and we should not be, we shouldn't be devalued in any way for any reason. Not by other people, no.
Good, thank you. Time, how much time do I have?
Okay.
So I read that you started the novel in 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk process.
Oh my gosh. So this I was working on a completely different novel. And that novel was not about this, but there were 2 marriages. One of them was a polygamous marriage. And those 2 marriages were driving the actions of the characters. And they were troubled marriages. And when I started this book interestingly, so Powder Necklace came out in 2010. And immediately after that, I started working on that other book. But I had sold Powder Necklace in 2008. So yes, I started it in around 2008, 2009. But as I was working on the book, pitching it, it kept getting rejected. And it was rejected. And I was just like, I know I have something here, but it's rejected. So what do I do? So then I, wrote Blue, the children's picture book, which started out not as a children's picture book, but as a poem to myself after reading the Bible about King Solomon's temple. And it was just, and this book comes out, but then I ultimately sold that book that couldn't get sold. I finally sold it to HarperCollins. So I was like, oh yeah, it's great, it's gonna be done. But then the editing process of that book was again it was an interesting process in the sense that it was an interesting process. So basically, what I got to was that this book is not working. And it's a hard thing as a writer when you have plunged. It felt like I had plunged so many years. I had from 2008 to I sold the book in 2019. So like over a decade of working on the same book and recrafting it and doing this and I got it this time, and you finally do all that. You sell it, and then the story's not over. And it was a big. It was a big lesson for me because I think that when I had, one of the great things that came out of that experience is one of the editors, because we kind of got to the place where it's like, oh my goodness, like this is not working, what are we gonna do? And one editor said to me, what was the reason you started writing this book in the first place? So I had to like go back to 2008 Nan, where I was like, what? Why did I start writing this book? And that's when I saw the 2 marriages. And as I mentioned, I was also in the process of, dating someone that I knew it was moving towards that. And I said, you know what? I think this is what I need to focus on. And then everything opened up. Everything just opened up. And the best thing about all of that, that circuitous path is what it taught me about being a writer is that you have to know exactly what it is you are writing. And that seems so obvious, but as a creative person, sometimes you are, if you're a painter, like you start, or you're a sculptor, like the thing is revealing itself to you as you are forming it. And I love that process. And it's a wonderful sort of like, it's a spiritual process. But when we're talking about like putting your work into the marketplace, you have to know exactly what the book is, because not only do you have to be able to, when you go into that editing process, know exactly what you need from the editor, right? You need the editor the editor is your midwife. And the editor has to help you deliver the baby you have been carrying, not shift you in directions that, you know. So that was the big sort of takeaway for me. But what's also important about that is once the book comes out, you have to be so certain about what it is you've done that it makes you relatively impervious to whatever anybody else has to say about it, because you know what it's about. So if people don't get it, you're like, okay, you don't get it, but this is what I'm doing. And that was, I would take that lesson any day. It was worth the decade.
Mm-hmm. Of course, during the intervening time, you published Blue.
Yes.
And you also edited Relations.
Yes.
Which I think was your own initiative.
Yes.
It's a collection, it's an anthology with other writers.
Yes.
Did you enjoy that process?
Loved it.
And
Loved it.
Why did you want to do it?
So, Relations is a collection of stories, essays, and poems by writers from all over the continent and the diaspora. And so I had already sold what ultimately became my parents' marriage to the publisher, and we were in that sort of process of, you know, making that book work. And then the pandemic, you know, happened, and I was stuck in my apartment in New York City. I had been to Peja, you know, I'd been to Ake, and I was loving my life. I was like, this is so amazing. I'm like an international author, you know, I travel to places and, you know, all of that. And but more than that, I loved the community. The community was so enlivening. You know, in 2014, I was able to get onto the Africa 39 list. And that was huge because that was the first time I was able to engage with a critical mass of writers from the continent and meet writers, you know, from DRC, meet writers from Kenya, meet all of these different things, and be in the same space and understand that, like, oh my gosh, we're all, you know, there is so much diversity and nuance and all of these different things to our stories. So when the pandemic happened and it cut off temporarily this idea, but at the time we didn't know what was happening, my ability to travel, I just felt so lost. And I felt like, what was that going to do to me and as a writer? And so I was talking to my publisher, we were having a conversation, and she said, well, what would you want to work on, you know? And I said, well, I would love to, you know, put together some sort of collection, you know, of African writing. And specifically, I wanted it to be about relations. The title made it through that whole process because I was really interested in the very specific dynamic that is on the continent in terms of the ways that we relate to one another, the obligations that we have to family, the obligations that we feel to people who aren't family. I wanted to kind of explore that, but then also explore the relationships that we have as a Black people globally. And so I pitched that, and they were like, okay. And I was like, okay. And so I just was able to go through this amazingly fun process of tapping into my network, asking people like, okay, would you like to be a part of this? You know, and it was amazing because one, being cooped up in my apartment in Queens, New York, now I'm getting all these stories. So I felt like Peja and Ake came to me, you know, I had that festival experience. But also, it was funny because I asked poets thinking that they were going to submit poems to me. No, they submit short stories. I asked fiction writers, they submit poems. I asked this nonfiction, they submit. It was just but it was beautiful because everyone was just sort of in this experimental, brave phase creatively. And so it was just beautiful to be able to be part of that with these writers.
And because you've talked quite a lot about the business of literature, your experience is really to be cherished because, and I hate to ask creatives anything to do with business, but there are so many stories and that can be delivered in so many formats that we are unable to do because it is just exhausting. The parts are non-existent. What it takes to produce an African story, and Nicole is here, she would know, right? That so much is left on the desk or in the cupboards, and we are nowhere near even like 1% of what we need to get out there for our people to consume in all the formats. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I mean, I love to work, or I draw sometimes. I will never read, for instance, detective crime. When I'm reading literature. But I absolutely will binge detective stories, especially the ones made in Britain. And I'm like, why can't we have, I want, like some of the stories that, and it's nice to see people like Ekua Brew-Hammond write detective stories. Like, I want a televised detective story set in Accra all the time. That is brilliant. But we know how difficult that is. It's not, we are not people interested in supporting creative output and making, these things much easier. We've lost our way. So I'm making a comment, but my question too is, what's to be done?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I do think that I think what needs to happen is we need more publishers here who have the resources to publish en masse. And I mean, that's obvious, but until that happens, it's always going to be this kind of lopsided, you're going to get one kind of story, or it's going to be difficult to get a critical mass of diversity of storytelling, because if you're publishing in the Western, in the West, and you're thinking about the Western marketplace, there are stories that are going to be the slam dunks for that market. And if that's what your work is, then that's what it is. The other thing too is it's a whole infrastructure. Like I said, I don't know where we would be if without the, Frankie Adosians. These platforms are happening because there are people who are creating them. And, unless we need more editors, we need more publishers, we need more bookstagrammers, we need more reviewers, we need all of those things. We need the infrastructure in place to support it, because there are so many stories, like you said. There's Kwekwate is turning them out, and it's amazing, and I'm sure there are a million more Kwekwates who,
Do I have time? Oh, time goes so fast when you're having fun. Who are some of your inspirations? Well, no, don't say my mother.
I have to say your mother, because when I went to Infantsiman, I will never forget this, and tears are coming to my eyes thinking about it, because I was like so depressed. I had like my head on the table, and then we were in literature class in English, and we were reading The Dilemma of a Ghost, and the English teacher started asking questions like, has anyone ever, asking questions basically about the central tension in the book between, Atu and Eulalie, and, African American.
Yes.
And I was the only one who could answer many of the questions from the African American side of things. And I just loved that book so much because in that moment, because I felt so, I was so unseen in that space. They were just like, Fantini onto Fanti, this, that. But to be reading a story about a Fanti man bringing home his American wife and, the tensions, I was like, I'm the tension, And so that meant so much to me, so much to me. So when I actually, met your mother, I couldn't even, someone was like, take a picture with her. I was like, I can't. I can't. So definitely your mom. Buchi Emecheta, oh my gosh. Love her work. Mariama Ba. Oh gosh. Yeah.
I have a story about Fantiman. Please indulge me. There used to be a time in Ghana, high schools, these schools staged plays, and it was excellent. So when I was in primary school, my mom was teaching at University of Cape Coast, and she was invited to attend the production of Ekua Sutherland's Edufa in Infantiman. To this day, what was I, 9? Goosebumps. And we've lost, all of that is gone, by the way. People can't be bothered to do literature. But anyway, thank you. But when you mention, you mentioned my mom. So let me tell you one of her pet peeves. Born of
what
trauma.
Have I done?
So these days when people write, they have multiple pages of acknowledgement, right? And she'll be like, why are they doing this? All these people to thank. Do they need all these people? And I would remind her that, during her time, there were just a couple, they didn't have editors.
Yeah.
My mom used to get pissed that somebody would now tell her I need an editor. It's like, I've edited. There was no infrastructure. So her reaction to these things, I say, is born of trauma. Because basically it was her and her fellow women writers. They'll be like, 6? And they would just say, this book is dedicated to my parents. That would be the end of it, because no one edited their work.
Yeah.
And when they were published by African Writers Series, it was a vanity project. So that, it was like, the colonialists are publishing African writers, and they would go on the world. They had no intentions of marketing. They didn't go on book tours.
Wow.
None of those things. So when she would say that, I'll be like, the world has changed, because obviously this is what it's going to take. And perhaps if they had had more support, they all would have written more books. We used to joke there are titles of books that she never filled, right? Because it's an infrastructure, as you said, yes. So thank you. Do we have questions? So here's my rule about questions. You will actually ask a question, and there shall not be a long preamble so that other people can ask questions. And if the question that you want to ask has been asked and answered by somebody else, please don't repeat. So she's here, and this platform that has been given, make hay, ask your questions. Because, she's suffering through the ad, so ask her. So,
The microphones.
She was first. Oh,
First, okay.
okay, Nicole, go.
Okay.
Ask, and then it goes to the woman in the other side.
Well, thank you to both of you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm being mischievous.
Oh, boy.
I believe I saw photos, and recently is relative, but recently you got married, I believe, right?
I did.
So I'm curious how that impacted this work, how your own marriage impacted this work, or how this work impacted your own marriage.
Oh,
I have a question. And in fact, let me tag on. So, that cesspit called Facebook. One day I go and her last name has changed. And I'm like, explain yourself.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, the first question. You know what? It didn't affect my marriage because I wrote it before I got married, but it just had me. I was just really thinking a lot about marriage and all of those things. So that definitely. But my amazing husband has sat through all of these panel discussions where I'm talking about marriage and all my ideas of men. So, I mean, he's been amazing, an amazing trooper through it all. I did change my my last name to Hafner. I don't know, I just...
I only bring
not
it
for
up.
the books.
Exactly.
Not for the books.
That's what I want.
For the books,
clarification.
I am
So
Ekua Brew-Hammond, and it's going to stay that way.
Okay.
But
That's that. In fact, that was my question.
yes.
Please give her the mic. Yes.
Good evening, and thank you so much. I'm also from Queens, New York.
Hey!
So, hey! Far Rockaway, Queens.
I was just going to say Queens Village, okay,
yes.
and Jackson Heights.
Jamaica as well.
Okay.
So what really stood out to me was just the moderator. You mentioned how you would love to hear more storytelling from the diaspora. And currently, as a Black American living in Ghana, I've been reflecting on how to share my personal experiences in a way that's authentic, but also navigates the fear of backlash or misunderstandings, because my experience living here could possibly trigger those who are from here. And so I'm just wondering, in your view, is fiction or nonfiction a better suited for capturing these truths? And can weaving personal stories into make-believe worlds be just as impactful, or even more so in conveying our experiences as diasporans?
I think that I don't think that nonfiction is or fiction is more gives you more freedom to tell those truths. I think that it just depends on you as the writer. And sometimes when you're working on something, you will see that maybe I really do need to write this as nonfiction. I need to tell the truth about this in this particular way. Or maybe, I think it depends on what it is that you're trying to do. But to answer your question about backlash, I think that one of the things that is probably really scary as a writer is like when you start to mine certain truths, it gets really scary. Like the book is called My Parents' Marriage, and I had many sleepless nights over choosing that title because I knew that it would, people would think, oh, is it about your parents? And I even, my mom's like, yeah. and I didn't want that, but it was, and the book is not even written in first person. So the title, My Parents' Marriage, was because I really wanted it to speak to the fact that everybody has some sort of feeling about their parents' union. And I wanted to create community for anybody who was interested in, willing to go there. So that's why I did that. But to answer your question very specifically, there is a short nonfiction piece in my anthology, Relations, that I think you would really appreciate. And it's written by an African-American woman, Kim Coleman Foote, who lived in Ghana. She did her Fulbright here. And she wrote, gosh, a searing, it broke my heart. Each time I read it, I'm like, whoa, oh my goodness. She wrote about her experience in Ghana. And I think that we have to tell each other these truths, not because we are trying to condemn anybody or, throw anyone under the bus or whatever. We have to tell each other these things so that we would know. Because sometimes there are so many, it's so easy to romanticize things or get lost in what has come before and just kind of duplicating that or replicating that. And everybody has their own experience, and we need that nuance so that we can be better. So I think I would just say to you that however the story needs to be told, you'll know as you start writing it. You might write it and say, okay, nah, like I need to just really name names. I need to name and shame, or you might write it and say, something, I don't want to make it about me. Because this is something that is happening in many different ways to other people. And so I want to make it fiction so that other people can enter into this story in a different kind of way.
Also, it is your right to write about Ghana. Don't fear any backlash. When the story, the thing she said about my mom wrote a play when she was a university student called Dilemma of a Ghost in the 60s, which is about a Ghanaian man who goes to the US and returns with an African-American wife. It's still very relevant. The thing she used to say towards the end of her life was that she couldn't believe she had the gumption. Have the gumption.
Yeah.
Right? It's your home. You didn't, your ancestors, what I'm trying to say? So don't fear the backlash. Ghanaians in particular will have backlash about everything. We fear any kind of introspection. That's not your problem. You have a story to tell. And actually, we need, like she's saying, just like how I'm like, let's write about our experiences there. These are experiences we need to also have and understand. Because for some of us, I don't think that somebody like me, and I'm very open, I don't think I know what it actually feels like when I say the doors are open and black folks can come home. What that experience is like actually when they get here. And it can only be if you write about it. So it's your right. Yeah? You're done.
Martin.
Martin, we'll come back to you if Martin has a question.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very pleasant discussion. Kina, I'm going to break your protocol a bit and give a little preamble.
Okay, so let me say that Martin writes some of the best fiction to come out of contemporary Ghana. He has a short story, indulge me. He has a short story where, he blends the metaphysics. You know how Ghanaians are performative religious? And and Martin teaches physics. So he has this short story where this guy is cracking the code on the lotteries. So in his apartment, he has servers that are running all the time. And for some strange reason, somebody, he'll tell you what book it's in. Somebody decides to break into this guy's apartment and figure out his secret. So he goes to a juju man, because he has to get in and out of the apartment. The juju man says, you know what, bring me a completely white ram, and I'll make you enter his apartment, and then you will exit unseen. But this man has a problem finding a complete white ram. So he finds a ram which is all white, but the balls are black. So when he's won, but that's what he could find. So when he enters and exits, what is happening? The balls are hanging on the wall, pulsating. It's amazing. Martin, your story.
Okay, thank you, Kina. First and foremost, Nana Ekua, congratulations on the book. I just want to comment that you've beaten me to it because I'm still sitting on my 2011 manuscript. But I wanted to add that you also have been very helpful to young writers in the community because of the workshops that you have led, and I wanted to bring that into the conversation. But the question really now is, when you look back at your work, especially this particular one, seeing how long it took and the changes you had to make to it, what is your relation with the work looking back? Is it something you feel you've completed? Did you abandon it? Is it something you want to read yourself? What is your relation with that book and the other ones? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. I do have so much heart for that book, but I want to go back to it, but I'm a little bit it's still so raw and so tender for me, that experience, all the experience that has been wrapped up with it, but I do want to go back to it, yes. But I also want to say quickly, since we're speaking, I want to thank Martin, because Martin, you have been one of the most amazing supports to me in this writing journey. I remember coming to Ghana with Powder Necklace 14 years ago, and you have just supported me all the way through. And I've thanked you in the book. These are the people that, you know, I couldn't have gotten to this without your support. So I just want to say thank you.
Question? Well, I'll continue.
Okay.
From where you started with Powder Necklace to where you are now, and so that people can learn, I see an improvement.
Yeah.
What was your process?
I mean, I think the process, I think a big part of it, as I mentioned, is working to get your book published takes you on its own journey it's a refining journey, whether that's refining of your personhood, your character, and then obviously the actual work. And you start to realize like what it is you stand for, because at least for me, when I first started writing, I just was always good with words and I loved reading, but over time, you start to develop what it is you want to say and your craft and how you're going to say it. And because I'm in an environment that is not necessarily hospitable to, I had to always figure out how to tell the story in a way that would capture a multiplicity of audiences, attention spans, and so I think that has made me better. So that's been a big part of the process, is just not giving up. Just keeping at it.
Is there a difference in the way that Africans, either on the continent or in the diaspora, have received the book, as opposed to non-Africans?
Yes. I think that people who are, based on the continent or have, experience with the continent and know what it is that, they know somebody who is in this type of situation or whatever, or that's in their family. I've gotten so many messages from people like that. I got one text that just said simply, "That's my parents' marriage." And I'm like, okay. And I got lots of messages like that. I got a lot of messages thanking me for not over-explaining things. And that was important to me. So that has been really good. And then I think that for people in the West, I feel like I've gotten a lot. It's been very interesting because, one, I forget that a lot of people can't get past this color. And so a lot of people read for maybe, it's part of a process of their own exoticization of other. And so when they are not this book doesn't really spoon feed the culture, you have to just enter in. And so I've gotten some people who are like, oh my gosh, like I don't understand what's going on and I don't know what to make of it, because they've been told that like it's bad to say something bad about. So they're like, okay, I don't know what to do. Like, is Maoli a good man or not? Should they stay in this? Like, it's not a neat story. And so I think that for people who are reading for that purpose, it's hard to know what they're supposed to leave with. But for people who have read it purely as a human story, I've gotten beautiful responses from those people.
I mean, I think that, I'm assuming there are no questions. An African woman writer will write about a multitude of issues. But what they will absolutely write about, sooner or later, are two things: polygamy, marriage, polygamous, and infertility, and how the society treats African women who don't have children. And yet, we haven't scratched. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like in this contemporary, you've written this book, Lola Shone's, Baba Segi's wives, and no matter how many books are going to come out on this topic, it's like when Western audiences want us to resolve the issue for them, I don't know whether we can, and it is not, in fact, the role of African women writers to resolve the issue of polygamy for people to say, okay, you've resolved it for us. It is for African women writers to explore women's lives in these arrangements and to see what exists in the spaces. You know what I mean? When you read Mariam Abba, you guys should read Mariam Abba. The
So
woman
good.
makes some amazing choices.
So good.
But it is so good. You know, you read, you're like, why are you still opening the door for this man to come in? But it is such a beautiful written story because women do that. And she does it without any level of judgment, which you also do. Because even Kokui, she judges, but it's not judgment, really, like she's living it. You know what I'm saying? So thank you. Thank you. Questions?
There's one
Yes.
here.
Hello, thank you very much for such an interesting discussion. Sometimes I think that the moderator is also a writer, of course, so it shows. I was interested in the title, Universal Stories, and wondering, in fact, as we were chatting it just before we started, about how stories can be universal, in that good stories tend to be particular. And yet, somehow, the universal can express itself in the particular. And wondering whether the fact that you've come to set a story in Ghana where it's the norm, somehow, perhaps to be a universal story, you have to have the confidence of writing within something you see as the norm rather than something you see as the outside. You can write a particular story as an outsider, but in a sense, you have to have the confidence of feeling that you are expressing humanity and not as something excluded to be universal, perhaps. So we were wondering whether a story can be universal or not, and I think this is how far I've got in trying to untangle what seems on the face of it to be impossible. So I'd be interested in what your thoughts about why you called it, or why this is called Universal Story, and what you think makes a story more far-reaching in people's ability to engage with it and learn from it and enjoy it.
I think what you said, I mean, I think particularity, nuance, is what is universal, right? Because anybody, if you are willing to love your neighbor as you love yourself, if you're willing to see yourself in another human being, then you can imagine if I was dropped into this very highly specific situation, how would I respond? How would I react? And it doesn't mean you would react the same way as what's happening in the story, but then I think then you can enter into the dialogue that happens when you're reading a book or when you're watching a film or when you're engaging with the story. And I think that's what it is, it's all about. I mean, I don't have to, we're talking about Jhumpa Lahiri, or there's so many writers. I'm in the middle of reading Abdul Razak Gurna's Paradise.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's not my experience, but he tells the story with such depth and such clarity and such detail that I can enter in. And so I think that and then once you're in, you're not looking at it as I'm outside of this context, but I'm a human being, and I'm relating to how it makes me feel and how we're feeling each other, as it were. So I think that is, at the end of the day, what it is. Like, I think my parents' marriage, like everybody's parents, whether they were married or not, whatever, you're here because parents. So what are your thoughts on that? Can you enter into that? Relations, the title of the anthology. You have relations, you are, involved, your relationships. What are your feelings about that? So I think as long as you can sort of come to that, I think we all come to stories with that baseline, and that's when, and hopefully as the writer, you're able to draw the person in enough that they can forget about the things that they don't know and enter in.
I think, and to extend that, I think if a writer sets out to write a universal story, they will fail.
Yeah.
What I think, because one of my favorite writers is a Czech writer called Bohumil Hrabal, and he was writing when Czechoslovakia was oppressed, and there's this character. His job is to incinerate books, and he rescues the books. I mean, I haven't been to Czechoslovakia. I don't know anything about it, but the book touches me in a way that somebody whom I worked with, who was from the former Soviet Union, told me that Things Fall Apart had touched her. And yet these books are incredibly specific. But what binds them, is she's saying, is that it is the truth as the writers wanted to write. So if you write your people well, and you give them their full humanity, and you actually get to the truth in, and it's fiction, but there's truth in it, in what they're experiencing. Somebody living in Greenland would be like, wow, my parents' marriage. Because you've written an incredibly truthful story, but they will see. It will touch them. You can't control what people are going to see from your book. You can only really be true to the artistic vision you had. And then the rest will play itself out. I love the Brothers Karamazov, and that's what makes a story. So, Dostoevsky doesn't set out to write. It was an incredibly commercial enterprise. He didn't set out to write a masterpiece that somebody in Ghana would be like, that's one of my favorite books. So I think it's important. I think a lot of young writers want to hit it big, or they want to say, I want to write a story that appeals to everybody. It will not appeal to anybody if you do that. Write your community, write your people well, and then people will find the story in it that is universal. Yeah. We have one left. And I also want to say it's a lovely title, isn't it? My Parents' Marriage. My mother used to say she couldn't understand why people would labor over a book and give it a horrible title. On the other hand, there are some titles that are excellent. There's this book, this writer has said, the title is A History of Tractors in the Ukrainian. Magnificent title. That's a nice book. So don't spoil your life's work with bad titles. Because people are going to pick up the book absolutely because of the title. This is a very fetching title.
Hi, my name is Matthew, and thank you for talking about your experience and your journey here with us this evening. I wanted to ask about the creative ecosystem. And you had an experience here as a younger woman, an educational experience. You went back to the United States and had an educational experience there. You're coming back and forth. And how do you see that, the creative community on both sides of the Atlantic? And what in your mind could be done to support it at, the high school level or at the university level to foster, aspiring artists and authors on both sides of the ocean?
That's so interesting. That's a great question. Okay, so in terms of the differences, I think that all I've known is New York in terms of the other side of the Atlantic, and then, here in Accra. I would say that when I came to release my first book in, 2010, as I met Martin, Writers Project of Ghana. I didn't realize, I believe at that time, Writers Project of Ghana was in its nascent, it was very early, because they were so, together, and to me, such a really strong infrastructure that they brought, and they really supported me. There's also Nana Aredamwa, Kofi Akpabli. They are publishers, also very strong supports to me and to the writing community. And they have like, the Writers Grotto, or at least they had. But they had lots of events where writers could come together, whether they were actually going to write together or they were going to perform their work, etc. So that was my experience in Accra. In New York, I think there is a really strong community, what I think is different is that perhaps because New York is one of the publishing epicenters, there is much more of a fight to get, not a fight amongst each other necessarily, but there are so many hoops that you're going through individually, and as you start to, you're on the circuit, like whether it's, you're on the reading circuit, trying to read your unpublished work at venues that will give you that opportunity to do so. You are maybe applying to get into different MFA programs. You are applying for fellowships. You're applying for this, you're applying for that. So as the years tick by, the people who are sort of like you keep seeing along the journey, the people that, we're all here trying to get our books published, and then one of us gets our books published, like amazing. Then you go to that reading. So I think that the community, for me anyway, really has been born of that, of just we're all sort of hustling, trying to get our work out there, and the people who are just sort of joining you on that journey, that's what it has been. I just moved to California, Oakland, California, and everyone's telling me, oh my gosh, the Bay Area, it's amazing. They have its own, literary ecosystem. I am new, so I don't know what that is yet, but what I can see is that it's very different from my experience in New York. So I feel very new again and excited to figure that out. But in terms of ways to really sort of, build that up so that it's, you're not on your own. You're not just twisting in the wind if you are a creative person. I think it's, there are organizations that do it. I mentored with an organization called Girls Right Now that is a national organization in the US that's really good, and its focus is high school young women, and there are other groups like that. But I think that in schools, one of the things is just giving students visibility to the authors they're reading, figuring out ways to bring the authors in, whether it's virtual or in person, because I find that kids have so many questions about what it actually means to be a writer. It's not, they want to know about the creative process, but they also want to know about the business of it. How does it actually work? And I think that if we can give young people who are interested in writing that exposure from early on, and then keep them in that network where they can now continually reach out to people and create that ecosystem for them, I think that would really sort of be a good thing.
I mean, a lot of among Achebe's generation, my mother's generation, they speak about there was a workshop organized in Ibadan. They all met there. All writers have that kind of seminal moment where there's a workshop and they realize, oh my God, I'm not the only one. Oh my God, we can do sprints together. I mean, because writing is such a solitary endeavor that if you're by yourself all the time, you may actually not finish it. But everybody will talk about, like you keep saying about Peja and Ake, there's always that thing where they see community. And that is very, very important. That people shouldn't feel alone.
Yeah.
We've come to the end of this evening.
Thank you, Kina. Thank you, Nana Ekua. Thank you, Mommy, for these gifts. Can we appreciate them? Nana Ekua's books are available to purchase at the Ghana Writers Desk behind us. And I believe...
And please buy books. So I've been sitting here selling books. The purpose of having a conversation with the writer is that I hope I have whetted your appetite, the exchange rate notwithstanding.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I believe you all can't wait to meet the characters of Kokui and Maoli. So let's lay our hands on a copy of My Parents' Marriage. Now I would like to invite the site director, Professor Frankie Edozian, to share a few words with us.
Thank you. Hey, Ekua. Finer and finer every year. You are most welcome to NYU Accra. We're so grateful you made the trip all the way from California. Remember that this is always going to be your home, creatively, and when the next books come, we will always launch them here. So thank you again for coming. As many of you know, New York University is and has always been a private university in the public service. And since February of 2020, we have used the Laboni Dialogue series to continue that public service work, to have essential conversations like this in the cultural space for our community, for our entire holistic education of ourselves. And so on behalf of all of the team here at Accra and in New York City, where they're all watching on the live stream, we thank you so much for taking this evening to come and commune with us and to have this literary conversation. It really means a lot. This is the 14th one that we've done, and every time we have these conversations, they are always so wonderful. So thank you for coming. This is our last public event for the year, and so it is important that we do say thank you to many of those people who have supported our arts and culture efforts, either online or in person, and some of them in particular have been stalwarts in supporting NYU Accra in this mission. One person in particular is His Excellency Charles Abani, United Nations Ambassador and Resident Coordinator, a big supporter of the arts. Another one of those people is Her Excellency Harriet Thompson, the British High Commissioner, who has made NYU Accra's Laboni Dialogues one of her places to be all the time. And most importantly, His Excellency Echad Razali from the European Union Ambassador to Ghana, who is always here and always supportive of us. To the many, many colleagues at the United States Embassy, the Norwegian Embassy, everyone who has been so supportive of our efforts all year, we thank you so much. We do this work in partnership, and so we want to say a special thank you to Latif Abubakar's Globe Productions, to Socialite AF, as well as Basics International out in Choker, one of our after-school partners. They have done so much work for the community, and we're just proud to be able to work with them. As I mentioned, our efforts are always in community, and a pillar of our community is our forever partner, the Writers Project of Ghana. Many of you saw Martin. He's going to be at that table with a ton of books, all discounted. We know the exchange rate is quite difficult at the moment, but everybody will be able to get a couple of books to take home today. As we approach the holiday season, we just ask you to think about writers and think about writing and get a book and maybe even gift a book, and that would be quite wonderful. We also want to tell you to say a huge thank you to another one of our wonderful partners, Academy 11. You can see them all around you in their red t-shirts. Everything we do is for the community, so we thank them for coming out to join us again today. And finally, one of our most wonderful partners is the Legon Panwine Band. You guys heard them at the beginning, and you'll be hearing them again as we transition to the book signing, the drinks, and the book buy-in. So on behalf of all of us here at NYU Accra, we thank you. We wish you a splendid weekend tomorrow, Farmers Day, and on Saturday. So Kina Likimani, you're my favorite. I know I say that about you all the time. But thank you again, and Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond Hafna. thank you very, very much for coming, and a wonderful weekend to all of you.
Thank you so much for your time. There's lots to drink. There are books to buy. We are taking pictures now. So please, right after that, we'll move to the book signing. Yes, please buy books and have Nana Ekua sign them for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.